From courtside of the virtual Hardwood, it's the NLSC Podcast. This is episode 526. I'm Andrew in our forum, Andrew NLSC on X. With me as always, my co-host Derek, DP3 in our forum, and DP3G and DP384 on X. Derek, good to be talking to you as always. Got another fun show for everyone this week. With that being said, what are we going to be talking about?
So, Andrew, our main topic this week is who is the worst and or most annoying commentator on NBA 2K video games over the last decade. And I did ask another community question, which we are going to use as next week's main topic, and that is the most overused words and terminology in basketball jargon. However, we are going to kick off this show, Andrew, talking about our recent session on basketball classics. So I only had about, I'd say 20 minutes to spare, and I reached out to Andrew on X, formerly known as Twitter, and asked him if he wanted to get a quick game in on something, and he was game, per usual, and we connected on Parsec, and I chose basketball classics, much to Andrew's delight, and we chose the 1985 roster that's built in to that game. He used the Bulls, and I used the Celtics, and man, they just did such a good job with that game, Andrew. It has all the classic feels. It has the awesome sound effects, the music that changes, for each quarter, including a very intense beat and rhythm in that fourth quarter. And just the graphics are very reminiscent of the double dribble days. And, they have a shot meter that works really well in that game. They have the, chase down block feature. They have, the adjusting dunk feature to try to avoid the block. They just made so many great design choices with that game. And Andrew did end up pulling out the win with a key block on one end and a mid-range jumper with MJ on the other end. And, they did such a good job with basketball classics, and that session was so much fun.
Mickey Jansen, the stand-in for Michael Jordan, as we called him on the show when we talked to Josh and Dave all those years ago. Yeah, I was delighted, as you said, when you put that on. I've been meaning to bring that back into the rotation, so yeah, very glad to see you pick that one. And yeah, just a great tribute to that 8-bit era in basketball games with those modern twists, as we've said before. Like you said, the shot meter is a great addition. The mini games, they work so well, just perfectly tuned to be fun but also challenging. And yeah, that game is just so much fun.
Yeah, and I think the play calling is very unique in that game, and it's a nice touch where, you're dribbling up the court and you can choose to either do a pick and roll or, an isolation or run a player off an off-ball screen. And, the players go into motion in a realistic manner, and you can actually run those plays and actually feel good about them, which is crazy on a game that celebrates 8-bit, right? To be able to do that stuff. And, that Josh and Dave of Namo Gamo, they knocked it out of the park with that title, and I'm glad that it reached, some semblance of popularity, and they have a lot of positive Steam reviews.
Yeah, kind of a bit of a cult classic, a modern cult classic. And that was awesome to see. Of course, I'm in the game as an unlockable character. You have to play through the story mode and unlock all the teams. And of course, that Phantom Squad can be pretty tough, but yeah, unlocking those extra teams is pretty fun.
So let's get to our main topic. And the reason why I thought of this question was my brothers and I, we were playing NBA 2K19 the other night. And part of the broadcast team of our first game was Bill Simmons, and we restarted the game. That's how much we hate Bill Simmons in the broadcast booth.
And he's a Celtics guy as well.
Yeah, Celtics guy or not, he is absolutely terrible in the booth, in our opinion. And I'll get into why during the discussion. But my question for the community was, over the last decade, NBA 2K has had many different commentators join the booth, including but not limited to Doris Burke, Chris Webber, Bill Simmons, Brent Barry, Steve Smith, etc. And as you know, Andrew, the new broadcasting team of Grant Hill and Brian Anderson, they can be part of this discussion as well. But my question to them is, who would you consider the worst and or most annoying? So I am going to kick this off because I already mentioned Bill Simmons. I think he is the number one most annoying. And it's that nasally voice of his It's the constant rambling. He's not even talking about the action ever. He's just rambling constantly. He's also very monotone throughout all of his commentary. There is no emotion with Bill Simmons, zero. I feel like he didn't belong in the booth. He sticks out like a sore thumb, in my opinion, and it feels like recording his lines and those conversations that he's having with Kevin Harlan was kind of like an afterthought and possibly a rush job at, the end of the game cycle or something. It doesn't make sense. And I don't think he adds anything positive to the booth.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it was supposed to be a shout out to when he would sometimes join TB crews for commentary. But to that point, I don't think he ever did a great job in real life in commentary. I mean, he is a writer. I have enjoyed his writing in the past sometimes, but I wouldn't say he's an analyst or commentator, an on-air analyst or commentator.
Yeah, I don't think he was ever good on TV either. I agree. I don't think he's good. He was good when he joined the booth. I don't think he was good at the desk. If you remember correctly, he was part of the ESPN crew.
Yes.
For a while. And he would frequently, be commentating either at halftime or at the end of a game or something like that, doing recaps and whatnot. And he always drove me nuts. So being a good writer doesn't make you a great voice. And it also doesn't mean that you can grip an audience, right? Because like I stated, his commentary in NBA 2K19, for example, it lacks of all emotion. Right.
And relevance to the action, as you said.
There's nothing. It's just complete monotone and it's just complete rambling. So that's my number one most annoying. What about you?
I might actually start off by mentioning another guest commentator. They brought KG, Kevin Garnett, into the booth as well. And he spent half the time, shout out to 2K, man, shout out to 2K. Like, it wasn't so much bringing him in to virtually commentate on the action, but to pump up 2K. It was really, really cheesy.
Yeah, well, I think Kevin Garnett is insane anyway. Like,
that doesn't help.
Probably legally insane. That's my opinion. When you listen to KG and his takes, and he flip-flops a lot. I love KG. I loved him when he was with the Celtics, loved him when he was with the Wolves. I think he's one of the most talented basketball players in the history of the game. But I do think he's insane. I didn't include any of those special guest commentators that were in 2K19. Like, I know Kobe was in there as well, because I'm thinking more of the regulars, the people that
See, I thought Bill Simmons was one of them. I thought he was technically one of the guests that would sometimes pop in.
Yeah, I thought Bill Simmons did the full game, or at least it felt like he did, but you might be right. It felt like I was listening to him for like a day
He's there
straight.
a lot.
That's how much
he's a big part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So no. So if I can say Bill Simmons, you can say KG. So definitely, I get where you're coming from. I think where there's a slight difference is at least KG shows some emotion, right?
Oh yeah.
Like, you can still get gripped by what KG says.
He's also a player,
right? Like,
so there's that. I don't know. And there's that entertaining aspect to it in a certain way, but he didn't really add any insight or analysis. And I know it's a basketball game. There's only so many lines you can record, but again, it just felt like he kept trying to pump up 2K and shout out NBA 2K, man. If he comes up in 2K19 or 2K20, whichever game it is that he appears in, I think it might be 2K20, him and Kobe, listen to his commentary. Most of it is just him hyping up 2K. It's
really weird.
It's on the nose.
The other, which is completely different than Kobe, who, when Kobe's on the mic in NBA 2K19, he is talking hoop.
Yes.
Right? He's talking about preparation. Like, he's talking about, his days as a player and all of that stuff. So yeah, I agree. I think that Kobe was definitely a lot stronger in 2K19 in the booth than KG. So number 2 for me, Andrew, Doris Burke. If I have to hear her say cerebral one more time, like, everything with Doris is a lecture or her trying to be smart or smarter than you. And, no, Doris, I don't think Draymond Green is a cerebral player. I feel like Doris would try to lecture me on how to properly make it to the kitchen and make a sandwich. Like, she also absolutely loses it over LeBron James during commentary. She's like, that's a bad man. And imagine a 6'9", 250-pound man coming at you. What are you going to do? And then when she goes off about using Twitch and says to Harlan, "You know I be twitching," and they both laugh, I always pause the game, and my brothers and I just lose it. We're like, we want to save the game right now and start over without her on the commentary. I think like it's way too much of a lecture. I think it's trying to lecture on the most basic aspects of basketball. I think that she basically, in a way, outsmarts herself and makes herself sound ridiculous, in my opinion. So Doris Burke drives me absolutely nuts in the booth.
Well, she's also one of my picks as well, and not to spoil the community responses, but a pretty common choice, actually. And, I mean, I will give her this. Her in-game performance is very sim. That is how she commentates in real life as well. I mean, I thought she did a great job as that roving reporter, or certainly a much more tolerable job as that roving reporter, that sideline reporter, interviewing players and coaches during breaks, and just chiming in here and there. But on the mic constantly throughout the game, like you say, trying to over-intellectualize, if you will, and kind of talk down to the audience, and yes, pump up certain players, LeBron being chief among them. And that is, I think, one of the annoying things to me about recent commentary in general, is that it is really trying to push that line of hyping up the now, downplaying past eras, and that's something that bothers you and I in real life, obviously. So to have that on the virtual hardwood as well is that extra level of annoyance. But Doris Burke is definitely guilty of that. I agree.
Yeah, I still find it funny that in 2K19 she's talking about Ben Simmons, and I think the question that Harlan posed to her was, basically like, what's the future of the league? Who do you think is going to be the best player or the top 5 best players, etc. And she just goes off about how great Ben Simmons is and how he's like the future of the league.
Feels funny, doesn't it?
It comes off as she was given a list of players to talk highly about, and so she spewed a bunch of nonsense. That's just like how that
so
comes
they
off.
certainly backed the winner there with Ben Simmons. Yeah, that was I mean, there was promise, there was potential. As I've said before, he actually did briefly live in my hometown of Newcastle, Australia. Some of his first forays into representative basketball were here for the Newcastle Hunters. One of my high school classmates actually coached him in the rep leagues here. So I did have some hopes for him. I was hoping that he would become a success, obviously, and represent Australia, which he continues to not do for the Boomers, obviously. But yeah, we've seen how that turned out, and that was not a good pick there.
No. I don't think he'll ever get it together. I don't think he loves basketball.
No.
To be honest
Some
with you.
people called that before the draft, actually.
I think it's pretty apparent that he doesn't love basketball, and I think one of the worst things I hate about Ben Simmons is how when he finally does get on the court and, puts up his triple singles, he tries to act like a tough guy, right? Mm. It's like, dude, you can't even play 20 games in a season. Don't try to act tough.
Yeah.
Right? You're not a tough guy in this league. You're not a durable player. You're not a reliable player. So I'm wondering if some of that with him comes from insecurity, a lack of love for the game or whatnot. But he's definitely not one of my favorite players. So who else you got?
Well, in a similar vein, Brent Barry. Brent Barry, again, has that very condescending tone when he's talking about basketball and trying to hype up current players, and I just don't want to hear that when I'm playing a basketball video game. It's bad enough to hear that conversation, those narratives, when real basketball is being discussed. So to hear it when you're playing a game and just trying to have a relaxing session or a fun session of virtual basketball, and you're still getting that, I'm just going to use the word propaganda, it's just so frustrating.
So Brent Barry was next on my list, but for a slightly different reason. However, I will agree that the propaganda with him and the scripted lines to prop up today's game, that is very obvious and super annoying. But almost everything out of his mouth when he is in the booth on the video game is an attempt at a joke or an attempt to be witty. Like, some common examples are him saying, he is like a carpenter out there, great floor awareness. And you can tell they have a security system on their house because they're protecting the paint. Like, these types of comments make up about 80% of his dialogue in the booth. And the other 20% is probably the propaganda that you're talking about. But, like, Bones, you're not funny, right? Like, this isn't witty. This is stupid. And he uses comments like that pretty, I would probably say a dozen times a game when he's on the mic. And, I liked him as a player. In fact, he was one of my brother's favorite players to draft in the earlier games because they always made him super athletic in the video games. Obviously, he jumped from the free throw line in the dunk contest and whatnot, and he could step out and hit the three. My brother loved players like that, guys who, the Petrus of the world, right? Who they made probably a little bit too athletic in the games, but could also step out and hit the threes. But hearing him on the commentary, and like you stated, that propaganda stuff, but then also just kind of like the snobbiness of him and how he also talks down to people kind of made me lose a little bit of respect for him. He almost is like a league goon now, right?
Yeah.
Like somebody who just kind of props up the league and kind of craps on the past and whatnot. So it's interesting with Bones.
Including his era, which is something that I find very interesting about players of that generation, that they're also insulting themselves when they do that. But that's a whole other topic, obviously. And I absolutely agree. I mean, as the saying goes, timing is everything when it comes to comedy. And when everything tries to be funny, every single line, everything you say, you're trying to make a joke, you end up being less funny. You've got to pick your spots and drop those witty lines when it makes sense. And yes, it is hard when it is a pre-recorded commentary and the game is picking the line at random. But to that point, when all of the lines are trying to be a joke, then you're going to run into that problem, just as in real life.
Brent Barry's not funny. I'll just put it out there. He's just not.
I mean, that's also important. To be funny, you need to be funny. Not to not to get too philosophical about it. But if you don't have that wit, you're not going to come across as witty. Let's put it that way.
Exactly. So next on my list, Andrew, and I'll throw it back to you, is Grant Hill. So the new commentary crew of Brian Anderson and Grant Hill just doesn't work. And the biggest reason is both of them come off as tryhards. It doesn't sound like their real life commentary either. I've actually heard Brian Anderson in real life, and he sounds a lot better than he does in the game. Just like the moments of excitement they appear fake in the video game when both of them are acting excited, and they appear to dumb things down to a ridiculous level, almost like they're talking to young children. Grant Hill also appears to be trying to cater to the young crowd in a major way. And it's not uncommon to hear him say, that was lit and whatnot during his commentary. And that coming out of a man's mouth who's in his mid-50s just sounds just kind of ridiculous. And, I've heard him, talk basketball and analyze in real life. And I don't think he's great, but he's definitely a lot better than he is in NBA 2K.
It does come across a little bit, how do you do, fellow kids, if you will. And even that is becoming a dated reference, I know. Yeah, that bothers me, obviously, and yes, we are that older generation, older millennials. He is I guess he is sort of mid-Gen X. Either way, we're all too old to be using that slang. And I know that it's trying to appeal to that younger demographic, but it comes across phony. And you remember how it was when we were that age, Derek, when you heard somebody much older trying to use our slang. It was just awkward. It was embarrassing.
It made me want to hide under a rock.
Yeah.
It made me want to crawl under a rock and just stay there until that person left.
It was so cringe. Yeah, absolutely. For real. But there you go. I mean, perfect example right there. And it's a shame because Grant Hill's always come across as a very genuine person. Great player, obviously. Imagine what he would have been if not for the injuries. And certainly has shown some personality and a very affable personality over the years. But yeah, that is very off-putting to my older millennial ears.
Yeah, I always switch off that commentary crew. So when you start a new game, it will switch the commentary crew up. Unfortunately, in my team, that's not the case. So you are stuck with whatever they give you. But, I'm not playing 2K24 anymore anyway. And the game that we're playing the most right now is NBA 2K19, and that doesn't have Grant Hill and Brian Anderson, so I don't really need to worry about it. But, I think that Grant Hill and Brian Anderson in the booth has been a flop. So what do you got next?
In a similar vein, Richard Jefferson, and I will admit that I've never really been a big fan of Richard Jefferson as a player or a personality. And again, there's a very smug, condescending nature to his commentary, and I think that's the worst part of it. I mean, commentary is always going to end up repetitive. There's going to be some ill-fitting lines here because of the logic. That's the game's design. That's not the commentator's fault. And sometimes it's going to be a bit bland. And sometimes bland is worse than bad or good because at least you can obviously enjoy the really good, and the bad can be kind of entertainingly bad sometimes. Bland is just really a slog to listen to. But Richard Jefferson, yeah, I've just never been a fan of his commentary in real life or again in games.
Richard Jefferson is sort of a member of the quote-unquote new media that Draymond Green was talking about. You know, the J.J. Redicks, the Kendrick Perkins, the Richard Jefferson, Draymond Green himself, who, even though he's a player, likes to spout off BS on his podcast, and he just runs his mouth constantly. Another thing those guys all have in common is, you know, sort of in a snobby way, crapping on prior eras of basketball. Richard Jefferson isn't as bad as J.J. Redick and whatnot, but I still would lump him in with that new media that Draymond Green was talking about, which basically the new media is apparently a bunch of cocky former players who think they know it all and are going to talk down to their audience. That's what that comes
pretty
off
much,
as
yeah.
to me, and it's super annoying. And they don't want to teach people about the history of the game. They don't want to celebrate the history of the game. They want to tear it down. And those are not the people that you want talking hoops to our youth. So that is super unfortunate. I will say this, Andrew. So people brought up Chris Webber. We're going to get to the responses now. I can tolerate Chris Webber, but my biggest issue with Chris Webber in the booth is just his rambling, right? His stories are so long. And sometimes when he's telling a story, while he's in the booth on like 2K19, for example, he'll be talking about it for like a minute straight, like through all the action, right? And actually, it's not super unrealistic because you do hear that in booths today and whatnot. And Chris Webber would do that in real life. It's not off base for him. Like, it's very realistic. But I would say that's my only gripe with Chris Webber when he's in the booth on video games, the rambling.
And that also highlights a problem with that approach to commentary. On one hand, it does add that authenticity and pads out the silence. And that is something that NBA Live has sometimes struggled with, just having that more raw commentary, that minimalist commentary, if you will. But at the same time, sometimes that's better because those anecdotes, you end up hearing them over and over again. If you're playing 12-minute quarters, full 82-game seasons, as we like to do, Derek, you're going to hear the same stories a lot.
Yeah, I think repetition is an issue with the commentary, and I think that's why a lot of people turn it off, especially because, you know, Kevin Harlan and Clark Kellogg have been in the games for so long now, and so many of their lines are recycled. And how many times do you want to hear that?
Sharing the sugar,
right?
yeah.
You know, for people who are veterans of the series, which there are millions out there that are veterans of the 2K series, and you know, how many times do you need to hear Harlan and Clark Kellogg and now Greg Anthony say the same crap over and over and over and over again? So I think a lot of times what they do with the commentary crew, and this was one of my responses to Phil Lime 2K, who kind of brought up the repetition, is I think that when a new game comes out, they will update the lines for the rookies. I think they'll update the lines for things that happened in the prior season. Otherwise, they're recycling, thousands of lines of commentary from prior titles, right? So that's why it's so repetitive, is because outside of the commentary added for the previous season and the new rookies coming in, it's basically just what you've been hearing over the years.
Yeah, a few more lines that maybe acknowledge last year's game or a recent trade or something like that, which is always nice, and that is appreciated to get them back into the booth to record some new lines. But yeah, you just hear the same lines for years and years, and the same voices, obviously. And there's a certain comfort to that. I mean, we grew up with Marv Albert, obviously, being the voice of basketball, so whenever you heard Marv, and when he came to NBA Live back in the day, it was really nice. There's kind of a comforting familiarity to hearing those same voices and having that voice of the game, that voice of basketball, real or virtual. But yeah, those same anecdotes, those same lines, it does get stale. And I do leave the commentary on, but a lot of people, as you said, do turn it off, and that is a smart decision.
Yeah, I personally like to have it on. I feel like sometimes the game feels dead without the commentary.
There's atmosphere
because,
there, yeah.
You know, we are playing on the broadcast angle, and
Sure.
we want it to also feel like a broadcast. And if a big shot is made or a poster dunk does happen and whatnot, we want to, have that excited commentary like you would in real life. It's also awesome for content creation, right? We do a lot of content creating on the NLSC, uploading gameplay videos and whatnot. And, I think it adds to those gameplay videos. I think it adds some excitement to them.
Oh, it definitely does. And there has been some improvement to commentary over the years that there are special excited lines and game winner lines that will get pulled out. You remember back in the day playing a game where you'd hit a game winning shot and would just say, oh, and he makes the 2-pointer. Like, it wouldn't have that special game winning commentary that they'd pull out. So it might as well have been just any other shot. Before we go on, a reminder that the NLSC podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, nba-live.com, as well as our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. If you're listening on any of those apps, we'd greatly appreciate a review. To keep up with the show and everything we're doing with basketball gaming in general, connect with us on social media. On Twitter and Facebook, we are the NLSC. We also have an Instagram, NLSC Basketball, and on YouTube, we're youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. Once again, visit us at nba-live.com, where in addition to the podcast, you'll also find all of our original content, as well as our forum and modding community.
So, Andrew, let's get to the community responses.
So first up, as you mentioned, is Phil Lime 2002, Phil Lime 2K on Twitter, says no one, because besides their voices, they don't really speak differently in 2K. Content-wise, is it just copy and paste, or what? And as you just said, Derek, yeah, they are recycling a lot of lines year to year.
Yeah, I think that my estimation would probably be around 80 to 85% of the lines are recycled. That's my opinion on it, based on how much repetition I hear and how much they do talk about, the prior season and new rookies and whatnot.
And Phil also goes on to say that he doesn't really have a problem with any of 2K's commentators. He doesn't have any least favorite or hate any commentators in real life. Does say he very much enjoys Kevin Harlan, but it's the only aspect he recognizes. He randomly goes crazy after normal dunks. I mean, that is a problem with commentary. As I said, there have been improvements where after a big play, you will have that reaction. After a game winner, you will have an actual reaction to an exciting shot rather than just being another bucket randomly during the game. But sometimes I have noticed that there'll be a dunk that's, it's dunks are always cool. They're exciting to a certain extent, but a very basic dunk will draw an over-the-top reaction, and that is not so much on Kevin Harlan. Obviously, it is on the logic of the commentary logic, the way the game is designed. But no, as far as an annoyance on commentary, I certainly do get that.
Harlan's biggest flub in the newest games is saying, oh, he dunked right over the top of Jokic, but Jokic is like 10 feet behind the play.
Yeah.
It's obviously not Harlan's fault. It's the way the game is programmed. But you'll have so many times where they'll call it a poster dunk or saying, oh, he dunked it right over this player.
He's in the vicinity. Player
isn't even in the play.
Yeah.
Right. So I think they need to fix some of that programming.
Next up, we have Bucky T says, Doris Burke for me, hands down, with the yawning and facepalm emojis. And yeah, Doris Burke, I think, is one that that annoys a lot of people for the reasons that we outlined. I would say that propping up the now at the expense of the past, that talking down to the listener. I think that's really what people don't like about Doris.
While Bill Simmons is the most annoying to me in the booth, I have the most face-palming moments with Doris Burke and Brent Barry.
The Live King, Steve, says Chris Webber was definitely the worst. And yeah, Chris Webber is one that people don't seem to like.
Yeah, I think it's his rambling. I'm sure the Live King would agree that that's probably the thing that annoys him the most. I also know that they parted ways in real life with Chris Webber as a member of the booth due to the fact that they said he wasn't connecting with the younger audience. And I think Webber was visibly frustrated with the state of basketball today. If you actually listened to a lot of the broadcasts with him on it and you were watching the games, he would spend more time saying, basically, what the hell are they doing and what is this new brand of basketball? Like commentary, centered around that, than he would be, talking positively about the game. So the network parted ways with him, and I haven't heard him in a booth since. So, but yeah, I agree. I think the biggest issue with Webber in 2K, and it kind of like what's one of his biggest issues in real life, was just the rambling.
Yeah, it is funny how he was shooed out of there for daring to question the current narrative. Absolutely. Taildog2K also mentions Weber is obviously the worst. Weber not very popular, as we said. Gameface Incorporated says Clark Kellogg, you cannot stop him or wish to contain him, is annoying. And Clark does have those homespun phrases, I guess, that are either charming or very annoying.
It's gotten old now with Clark. He's been on the game in the booth saying a lot of the same lines for well over a decade now, Andrew. So I think that there are gamers out there that are a little bit annoyed with Clark Kellogg. I'm also just kind of a little annoyed with Greg Anthony, too. I think Greg Anthony's commentary in the games has gotten old as well. But, yeah, Clark Kellogg still says lines in the game that he was saying well over a decade ago.
Yeah, some lines are not as iconic as others. I mean, if you've got a Mike Breen bang or a Marv Albert yes, you can kind of run with that. But some lines do get cheesy and old, and you do need to retire and replace them. 2K Build Guru says after a few playthroughs, all of them are now just set to on-court for a realistic experience. And as we noted, people do disable the commentary after a while, they mute it, and I've never done it intentionally, and I've told this story before on the show, Derek, but there was a time when my old TV was on its way out, and I ended up briefly replacing it with a monitor before I bought a new TV, and I was using a monitor and some very old PC speakers, and the PC speakers were also on the way out. There were some problems with some of the audio channels, and only the sounds of the court were coming through, and the whistles and so forth. The commentary was kind of muffled to the point where I could barely hear it, and for a while there I was playing my career with no commentary, essentially. And it was a very interesting experience because it was kind of immersive, because when an NBA player is on the court, obviously they can't hear the commentary. So that was interesting. But at the same time, when I did get the new TV and I could listen to the commentary again, I kept the commentary on because, as you said, it does bring that on-court experience, that atmosphere. You have that reaction, and it's better for content creation. But it was definitely interesting to play with the commentary off. I'd be interested to do it again, at least in my career, for that authentic on-court experience, like I'm on the court experience, if you will. I'd be interested to try it out, just to see how I like it.
I can see the draw, especially in that atmosphere, right? Like if you're playing, I don't know, my career or something like that, and you're playing in that camera view where you're like right behind the player and it's low to the floor and all of that stuff, and you want to feel like you're really on the court, etc. Like I guess I can understand it a little bit more in those situations.
And jumping over to our Facebook page now, Steven says, Chris Webber was way too dry in his commentary. I bought 2K18 to hear Kobe as a guest commentator. And I think a lot of people were excited to hear Kobe in the game, but once again, no love for Chris Webber there.
I thought Kobe was great in the game. I don't think he had enough lines, to be honest with you. I don't think he, I wish he could have said more, but I honestly think KG talked too much. So, yeah, it's interesting how that works.
But you got to shout out 2K.
Yeah. He says that so much.
Marco says, I love Smitty. Burke is hard to listen to. So once again, Doris Burke, not particularly popular with gamers and probably long-time basketball fans as well. But yeah, I thought Steve Smith was solid.
Yeah, you notice Steve Smith wasn't on my list. I think Steve Smith is incredibly solid in the booth. I think he talks without an agenda. I think he does a very good job of balancing his praise for, the past game as well as the current game. I think that he is probably the most fair in the booth. So, yeah, I like Smitty on the mic. So jumping over to the Discord real quick, Juicy Shack Meat states, Grant Hill, and then quote-unquote, that's lit. So cringe-inducing. So, obviously, Juicy Shack Meat had an issue with Grant Hill. And, Grant Hill kind of coming off as a try-hard and phony, like I stated before, on the mic and trying to cater to the young audience, but to a fault. Careless XCI states, the most annoying ever must be Jay Williams in Live 19. In 2K games, maybe when they brought Kobe and KG to talk about long, random stories that had absolutely nothing to do with the game. I don't remember when it was. So that was NBA 2K19. But let's talk about Jay Williams real quick, Andrew. I think Jay Williams, putting him on the mic on NBA Live 19, and he was obviously part of the replacement for Mike Breen and Jeff Van Gundy because EA Sports wanted to save money. Jay Williams is absolutely terrible. He is one of the worst, if not the worst, in the booth in basketball video game history. In my opinion, I absolutely hated listening to him. The agenda with Jay Williams was absolutely ridiculous. If I had to hear him say one more time that Joel Embiid is the modern day Shaquille O'Neal, I absolutely can't stand Jay Williams in the booth.
I mean, Shaq won championships, so just put that out there, trusting the process and all of that. I mean, I'm not a fan of Jay Williams in real life, and that translated over to the video games as well. That was a huge downgrade, going from Mike Breen and Jeff Van Gundy to Ed Cohen and Jay Williams in Live 19. Absolutely. I mean, we focused on 2K this episode, but that is absolutely worth a mention, because that is one of the biggest downgrades in commentary in basketball gaming history, and certainly one of my least favorites as well.
Yeah, I can't stand him in real life either. I think he's full of crap most of the time. So back to the Discord responses. Ken states, generally, BA is pretty bland, talking about Brian Anderson. I mean, his version of Bounce to the Ounce is pretty cringe, and he shares a clip where BA says it. And he also states, otherwise, I'm not really a fan of Richard Jefferson either. To your point, Andrew, he always comes across as snarky and condescending. Still, I'd take any of the NBA announcers over what they have for the WNBA games. We didn't even get into that. The WNBA commentary in the NBA 2K games, Andrew, that is one commentary I will shut off. It is absolutely terrible. Talk about nasally. It's very Bill Simmons-esque. And I feel like half the time they don't know about the players that they're talking about. I feel like half the time they don't really understand what's going on the basketball court. It feels like it's incredibly dumbed down and silly. So I definitely agree with Ken there. The WNBA commentary is absolutely terrible.
Yeah, Kenny's been playing a lot of WNBA stuff since it came in, so he definitely knows all about that, and it is a shame that it is so bland. And yes, to his point, Brian Anderson and Grant Hill, definitely the B squad. They definitely stand out as the B squad of the commentators. And Kenny mentions that he wishes they had the option to choose which commentators you have on the game, but if they did that, someone's feelings would probably get hurt. And yeah, that's what it comes down to, which is funny because obviously we can turn off the commentary completely, which is probably just as insulting or wasteful if you want to argue that. But yeah, it would be great to be able to choose the commentary team before you get into the game. I remember that NCAA Basketball 10 actually allowed you to do that. You could choose between the ESPN or CBS broadcast.
Yeah, I think that would be a great option. But like you said, feelings would be hurt.
Yeah.
Like those people were, signed a contract to be in the game. And part of that is also a promotion of them as people, right? To something that can help their career and whatnot. So, yeah, there'd be some hurt feelings there. And the last response on Discord, Andrew, Caps4872, he says, I actually agree with Ken, talking about Richard Jefferson. He said, he somehow seems like a cool and humble guy, but also an a-hole at the same time. I've really grown to like Gus Johnson. He did Cavs Magic on TNT today, so in real life he really likes Gus Johnson. And Vince Carter was in for Kenny Smith today and did a good job. Vince Carter, in real life, when he was trying to break down games for ESPN before they parted ways with him, I wasn't really a fan, actually. He seemed incredibly unorganized to me. I feel like he's gotten better since, but when they were asking him to, break down action in real time, when they were asking him to expand on strengths and weaknesses and whatnot, Vince Carter seemed to be super flustered. I think it's maybe because he was a new analyst and he hadn't really gotten comfortable yet, because we all know that Vinsanity knows hoop, Andrew.
Sure.
Right? But I think there's a difference between oftentimes an experienced analyst and somebody who's just getting his legs underneath him. And speaking of legs, Tim Legler is one of the best.
Definitely.
Tim Legler as an analyst, I could listen to him all day talk basketball because he's honest, he's fair, he breaks it down like we used to hear Mike Fratello break it down, right? And that's why we love the Czar, Mike Fratello. He also reminds me a little bit of, Doug Collins. Doug Collins, whenever you heard him talk hoop and whatnot, or when he was in the booth, Doug Collins would break down the action. He was fair, he was honest, and he just knew his stuff. So, yeah, there's definitely levels when it comes to basketball analysts.
Yeah, Legler has been doing it for a long time. I remember really enjoying him back in the day, in the early days of watching NBA on ESPN. And he's a real throwback to that actual analysis of the game. Not just a hot take artist, not like your Kendrick Perkins or your JJ Redick and all the new media guys. He is old media in the best way possible, trying to educate fans, explain the game, analyze what's going on, and give a nuanced perspective.
Exactly. I think that the average person never likes to be talked down to, right? I think that the average person wants to be educated, but in a way that's not condescending. And if somebody can have the appropriate approach as far as, teaching somebody the nuances of the game, teaching people about the history of the game, the strengths and weaknesses of players and teams and whatnot, and they do it in a way that connects with the audience, that's when you have a crowd of people that, can actually learn the game, and they can learn it without, feeling like somebody's talking down to them. So actually the last response on Discord comes from Tin Pan Alley, and he goes a little bit off topic here, but it's still part of the broadcasting team. He's talking about interviewing players in between quarters or at halftime and whatnot. And he states, the entire interviewing of players at all at any point in a game has never ceased to be unbearably pointless to me. Nobody in the history of sports has ever wanted any player to take us through what you were thinking in any given moment. Sports journalism is so bad now that the term itself is oxymoronic. It was 20 to 30 years ago a forum of wordsmiths and truly intelligent minds analyzing strategies and reflecting the action to people who cared about the sport itself. It's now all just unpleasant noise, but for a few talented commentators whose words actually elevate what one is watching. So I will agree with it. I absolutely hate the interviews with players in between quarters or at halftime. I also hated when they interviewed coaches in between quarters at halftime or at the end of the third quarter. It was always just kind of cringeworthy, in my opinion, when they would try to interview Greg Popovich, and Popovich wouldn't want to talk about any strategy. He wouldn't want to talk about the game, and he would just kind of give snarky remarks to the sideline reporter. Or they would try to interview someone like Steve Kerr, and Steve Kerr would just give the most general response that you could possibly give, like, oh, we're playing hard, right? Or we need to pick up our defense. It's like, well,
obviously,
no crap.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, obviously. So it always felt just like a ridiculous formality that didn't need to be there.
Oh, for sure. I absolutely agree. And I agree with his overarching point as well, that sports journalism isn't a bad place, that it has become, as we just said, all about hot takes and putting the most outrageous thing out there to get attention and get people talking and whipping up tribalism and things like that. And yeah, that's always been a part of it, I suppose, with sports talk and sports talk shows and all that kind of stuff. But as he says, 20 to 30 years ago, it was more about having the people who knew what they were talking about, educating people without talking down to them, analysing the game, breaking it down so people would actually learn something about strategy and how players operated at the highest level of the sport. And now it is just about the hot takes, and it's just watered down the discourse to the point where you and I often avoid it on social media.
It also felt like a lot of the commentary back then was more genuine. Like the excitement was more genuine.
Wasn't a product.
That the commentators and the broadcast team in general felt like they were true fans of basketball, right? Like they loved what they did. They were truly excited about the action on the court, and they wanted to share their knowledge of the game to create a better basketball world for everybody. That's the way it felt. Like, even if you go back to the 80s, when somebody like Tommy Heinsohn was doing national broadcast games and whatnot, his excitement was genuine. The way he broke down the games was incredibly genuine. And when you heard Tommy Heinsohn talk about basketball, and when he was in that booth, you knew that Tommy Heinsohn loved basketball. Andrew, like, you knew he loved being there. He loved what he was doing. And that adds to the immersion as a fan, right? He would often put you at the edge of your seat. But yeah, the Doug Collins of the world, the Mike Fratellos, they were so underrated back then, and they're even more underrated now because of their genuine knowledge of the game and their genuine love for basketball.
No doubt. They weren't trying to be personalities. They were trying to commentate on the game.
Exactly.
So thank you to everybody who responded to Derek's question about least favorite commentators in NBA 2K. A lot of common answers there, not too surprising. But before we wrap up today, Derek, how about we get into some trivia?
Yeah, so a couple of weeks ago, I posted on X, formerly known as Twitter, Basketball Gamers. Can you match the point guard to his overall rating? These are the top 10 point guards in NBA 2K9. And as I stated, the ratings reflect the 07-08 season. So, Andrew, this always puts you in a difficult spot because this is not an easy thing to do. But I am going to quiz you first, and then we'll get to the answers and then the community responses. The overalls for NBA 2K9 point guards, the top 10, are 94, 94, 92, 90, 90, 90, 90, 89, 88, and 86. And the players that you have to choose from to try to match the overalls are Derrick Rose, Steve Nash, Gilbert Arenas, Devin Harris. Yes, folks, Devin Harris. Jason Kidd, Rajon Rondo, Darren Williams, Tony Parker, Chauncey Billups, and Baron Davis. So let's see how many you can get right.
Yeah, it's always fun because you're trying to think of the era, you're trying to think of how they rated the players in the game. But yeah, let's see how I do. If I can get at least one, then, it hasn't been a complete failure, obviously. I've avoided the sweep, if you will, Derek. So, 94 and 94, top-rated players, top-rated point guards in 2K9. I'm going to say that it is Kidd and Arenas, followed by Rondo at 92. The 90s, I'm going to say Nash, Harris, Rondo, Williams, and then Parker, Billups, and Rose.
I think you got a couple right. You got Arenas as a 94 overall. You guessed 94 overall for Kidd, but Kidd was actually 92 overall. And you guessed Devin Harris at 90 overall. So at the very least, from memory, you got 3 right, which isn't bad. But this is, and correct me if there's another one you got right as I read this out loud. So Arenas is 94, Darren Williams 94, Jason Kidd, Jason Kidd 92, Baron Davis 90, Devin Harris 90, Chauncey Billups 90, Tony Parker 90, Derrick Rose 89, Steve Nash 88, and Rondo 86. And that's actually high for Rondo, based on the actual numbers that he put up for that 07-08 Celtics team. But he was considered, now the future point guard for that franchise. So I think they pumped up his rating a little bit there. But you didn't do too bad there.
Yeah, I got a couple of them. And Nash is the one that I'm kicking myself over now because I know this from working on rosters for so many years. Nash is the player that is very difficult to rate because his athletic ratings and his defensive ratings would always bring his overall down to the point where it didn't look correct, quote-unquote correct, because it was lower than other players who were less prominent, had a lower stature in the league, weren't two-time MVPs, weren't considered ahead of him as a player or point guard in the league, but his overall was always a little bit lower. I should have known that. But I thought, no, he's going to be a 90, but no, 88, that makes sense. Looking back, that often happened with Steve Nash.
Imagine thinking that Devin Harris is better than Steve Nash, Rondo, and Derrick Rose, and on the same level as Tony Parker, Chauncey Billups, and Baron Davis.
Chris Paul. I just realized Chris Paul wasn't on that list.
Nope. And that's how ridiculous the ratings were also in NBA 2K9 at times. As you know, a lot of them were inflated. And that game historically has, I want to say, the most 99 overall players in NBA 2K's history. But Devin Harris had that one season on a subpar Nets team where he averaged about 20 points per game alongside Vince Carter. And then all of a sudden they thought that Devin Harris was this amazing player, right? Devin Harris being 90 overall is criminal, to be honest with you, based on his actual skill level. Not saying that he was a scrub or a bad player or anything like that, but no way he's on the same tier as those other guys.
Yeah, NBA 2K9 definitely pumped up those overall ratings. The amount of 99s, I did a Way Back Wednesday on that at your suggestion, actually. Just so many of them. I think Wade was there as a 99, KG. Great players, obviously, but they were very generous with the 99s. And you can see how the athletic ratings pumped up the overalls for some of those players.
Oh, no, absolutely. Not that Devin Harris was an athletic freak. I think that rating is just off in general.
That one's just a few too high, yeah, absolutely. And I suppose the other surprising one for me was Derrick Rose being 88. I mean, as a rookie, I thought that he might be the lowest.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is based off potential. So, I mean, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, and again, athleticism, obviously. So that's how I fared, 3 out of 10. Let's see how the community does. Bucky T says Rose 86, Nash 94, Parker 92, Arenas 94, Kidd 90, Darren Williams 90, Rondo 90, Baron Davis 88, Billups 90, and Devin Harris 89. And Arenas obviously getting the 94 there. Parker is another player who often got underrated as well, thanks to not having the best athleticism or defensive ratings.
You and Bucky T both got Arenas. He was a big deal in the league at the time, a top scorer. But yeah, so he got that one right. And that's tied for the top for point guards in that game, tied with Darren Williams.
Garva says, tough one. Arenas and Nash 94, Davis 92, Parker, Kidd, Williams, and Rondo 90, Billups 89, Rose 88, and Harris 86.
So again, 100% on Arenas. He got that one right. And he also got Parker at 90. So he got 2 right out of 10, which again is still pretty solid because this is not easy.
I do love that nobody is cheating with this.
They could easily put on the game if they have it. I know Bucky T probably owns this game too, but he decided to not cheat, and I appreciate that.
Big Perk says Derrick Rose 94, Steve Nash 92, Arenas 94, Kidd 90, Rondo 90, Parker 90, D. Will 90, Parker 88, Billups 89, and Baron Davis 86.
So he got 2 right. So Arenas, again, all 4 people who have guessed, including you, have gotten Arenas correct at 94. And he also got Parker. So the same as the last contestant there. So, 2 out of 10.
And jumping over to Facebook for one more answer now. Royce says, going down the order from 94 to 86, Nash, Rondo, Williams, Arenas, Rose, Parker, Harris, Kidd, Davis, and Billups.
So he got Parker and Harris right. He's the first person to not guess Gilbert Arenas at 94, so another 2 out of 10. But yeah, no, thank you to the community for responding to this one. This one was really tough. I might try to make the next one a little bit easier with less choices because guessing 10 is not easy for anything, especially for a game that came out over 15 years ago. So thank you for your participation.
Always fun to do the trivia, so looking forward to which one you'll come up with next. With that being said, that has brought us to the end of this week's show. As always, we thank you for tuning in and invite you to join us again next week, either on the NLSC, nb-live.com, our YouTube channel, or your podcast app of choice. In the meantime, please connect with us on social media. That's where you can get in touch with us and, of course, stay up to date with all of our content. So, Derek, go ahead and plug the handles.
Yeah, you can reach me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at D for3G and at D for 384. I'm also on the NLSC, D for 3, and on YouTube, D for 3.
As for me, I'm Andrew in the forum and Andrew NLSC on X. The NLSC's on X and Facebook at the NLSC. We're also NLSC Basketball on Instagram and Threads. On YouTube, we're at NBA Live Series Center. And of course, keep a look to the NLSC itself, nb-live.com, for everything we do for basketball video games. So, thank you once again for tuning in, and until next time, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Derek.
Go get buckets, everyone!